Hello and welcome to the channel of the Beatdown Masters. We love Magic and especially Commander. With this channel we want to share our love for the game with you and provide you with interesting content all around Magic the Gathering. In this first video we recorded a cEDH gameplay, so let's jump right into the deck introductions. First we have Luke playing with a Selvala Brostorm deck. This build around Selvala, Heart of the Wilds, tries to quickly ramp out with creatures in order to assemble its combo to generate infinite mana with Selvala's ability to play into huge spells that wipes out all of the opponents immediately. Luke's opening hand includes a Forest, a Nyx's Shrine to Nyx, a Worldly Tutor, a Ravaging Riftworm, a Natural Order, a Noxious Revival and a Genesis Wave. Second, we have Matt piloting Najeela the Blade Blossom. This tempo deck is very adaptive and can maintain either a good board presence with creatures eventually getting infinite combat steps or controlling the board until all the required combo pieces are assembled. Matt's hand contains a Verdant Catacombs, a Godless Shrine, a Lotus Petal, a Diabolic Intent, a Stony Silence, a Rushblade Commander and an Occam Adversary. Third in the group we have Dario playing a Sur Stacks deck. This highly disruptive commander deck tries to slow down the game and interfering with the game plans of its opponents. In this way, Sur has enough time to assemble its own combo pieces to win in the late game. Dario's opening hand has a Forbidden Orchard, a Tolaria West, a Sunken Ruins, a Grand Abolisher, a Windfall, a Force of Negation, and a Narset Porter of Wales. Last but not least we have Knots playing with Chulane, Teller of Tales. This mid-range deck has a lot of creature-based ramp in it. With the ability of Chulane, it eventually tries to draw its whole deck at once and win with a game-ending spell. It has also built in some disruption to interact with its opponents. Knots' hand consists of a command tower, a forest, a flooded grove, an Elvish Mystic, a Llanowar Elves, a Grafdigger's Cage, and a crop rotation. With the introduction out of the way, let's get started. Luke starts the game, he draws and plays a Forest. He then passes the turn to Matt. Matt draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. After that, he gives the turn to Dario. Dario draws and brings a Flooded Strand into play. He then passes the turn to Knots. Knots draws his card and then he plays a Forest. He taps the Forest and plays a Llanowar Elves. He moves to his end step, in which Luke pays 1 mana to cast a Worldly Tutor that resolves. With it, he searches an Arbor Elf on top of his library. Luke then begins his second turn. He untaps and draws his card for the turn and plays another Forest. He then plays the previously searched Arbor Elf. In response, Matt pays 1 life and sacrifices his Verdant Catacombs to search a Stomping Ground and brings it onto the battlefield tapped. After that, Luke gives the turn to Matt. Matt plays a Godless Shrine and pays 2 life so it enters the battlefield untapped. He then casts a Lotus Petal and immediately sacks it to generate a red mana. With the other 2 lands he generates 3 mana together and plays his commander Najeela the Blade Blossom. After that, he passes the turn to Dario. In Matt's end step, Dario fetches a Hallowed Fountain onto the battlefield, paying 1 life. He then draws his card for the turn and plays a Sunken Ruins. As the stacks player on the battlefield, he keeps his mana open and gives the turn to Knots. Knots draws his card and brings a command tower onto the battlefield. In his first main phase, he plays an Elvish Mystic. For another 2 green mana, he plays a Priest of Titania. Having ramped as he wished for, he gladly passes the turn to Luke. Luke begins his third turn by drawing a card and then playing a Nyx's Shrine to Nyx as his land for the turn. He then pays 3 mana to play his commander Selvala Heart of the Wilds, which surprisingly resolves. Set up for his next turn, he passes the turn to Matt. Matt draws his card and with missing his third land drop, Matt moves to declare attackers. He swings Najeela at Dario and generating a 1/1 white warrior creature token, also attacking Dario due to Najeela's trigger. Dario takes 4 damage, and in his second main phase, Matt plays a Rushblade commander, giving all his warrior haste. After that, he passes the turn to Dario. Dario draws his card and then plays a Plains. In his first main, he plays a Grand Abolisher for 2 white mana, preventing anybody else to play spells or activate abilities in his own turn. With nothing else, he gives the turn to Knutz. Knutz untaps and draws. He then brings a Cavern of Souls onto the battlefield, naming Druids. He then taps his Cavern of Souls, his command tower, and the Priest of Titania to generate a total of 6 mana to play his commander, Chulane, Teller of Tales, which can't be countered due to the protection from the Cavern of Souls. He follows up this play by casting a Destiny Spinner, further protecting all his future plays. On the cast Chulane triggers, he draws a card and brings a Flooded Grove onto the battlefield. He then gives the turn to Luke. Luke untaps and draws his 4th card this game and plays a Yamimaya Hollow as his land for the turn. He then pays 3 mana for a Ravaging Riftworm, which enters the battlefield with 2 time counters on it. Selvala triggers off of this ETB and Luke draws a card. After that, he activates his Arbor Elf to untap a forest. He then pays 1 mana to activate Selvalla's ability, generating 6 mana because of Ravaging Riftworm's strength. For 4 manas, he plays Natural Order, sacrificing the Arbor Elf as additional cost. As the spell resolves, he searches for a Great Oak Guardian and puts him onto the battlefield. On the ETB, Luke untaps all his creatures. After that, he again pays 1 mana to activate Selvalla's ability, generating another 8 mana because of the buffed Ravaging Riftworm. With a total of 9 mana in his pool, he attempts to cast an Eldritch Evolution for 3 mana and sacrifices his Ravaging Riftworm as an additional cost. Matt, knowing that this tutor must be stopped but having no options available, passes the priority to Dario, which, for the relief of the table, casts a Force of Negation by exiling a Fierce Guardianship as cost. The Force of Negation resolves and counters the Eldritch Evolution. Luke follows up by playing an Elvish Mystic and after that pays 2 mana to tap his Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx to generate 4 mana. With the remaining 3 mana from his mana pool, he casts a Genesis Wave X = 4. The spell resolves and from his 4 top cards Luke puts a Wayward Swartooth and a Command Beacon onto the battlefield. After an eventful turn with a very close win, Luke sadly passes the turn to Matt. Matt untaps, draws his card and again misses his land drop. He plays for 2 instead of 4 mana an Occam Adversary, which has haste thanks to the Rushblade commander. He then moves to his attack phase and declares the Occam Adversary and the warrior token as attackers for Dario's phase. On attack, Najeela triggers and Matt brings 2 more warrior tokens onto the battlefield, also attacking Dario. Dario blocks the total damage of 5 with his phase and Matt draws a card because of Occam Adversary. At the end of Matt's turn, Knutz plays a crop rotation by sacrificing his forest and searches for a Gaia's Cradle, which he puts onto the battlefield. After that, the turn shifts to Dario. Dario draws and puts a Polluted Delta onto the battlefield. He then plays for 3 mana the Transmute costs of Tolaria West, discarding it and searching his library for a card with CMC 0. He reveals a Mana Crypt and puts it into his hand. He then gives the turn to Knutz. Knutz draws for the turn and then taps his Priest of Titania, adding 6 green mana to his mana pool for every elf on the battlefield. In addition, he taps the Elvish Mystic to add another green mana into his pool. For 3 mana, he activates Chulane's ability, returning the Elvish Mystic back to his hand. Then, he pays 1 green mana from his pool and plays the Elvish Mystic. Chulane triggers off of this cast, and Knutz draws a card, but is not able to put a land onto the battlefield. With another mana from his pool and by tapping his command tower for a white mana, he plays a Containment Priest. Chulane once again triggers, and Knutz draws a card, but can't put a land onto the battlefield again. He then ends the turn with playing a Gravedigger's Cage. Luke draws his card for the turn and puts the Wirewood Lodge onto the battlefield. With nothing else to do, he passes the turn to Matt. He draws his card for the turn and is able to play a Hallowed Fountain as his third land on his fifth turn and shocks himself for 2 damage. In his first main phase, he plays an Elves of Deep Shadow. He then moves to the combat phase and declares attackers. With the Oakham adversary and 1 warrior, he swings at Dario and with 2 warrior tokens at Knutz. On declaring attackers, Najeela triggers and 4 more warriors enter the battlefield. 2 of them are attacking Dario and 2 of them are attacking Knutz. Dario declares no blockers, taking 5 damage, and Knutz blocks 1 warrior with his Destiny Spinner and 1 with the Containment Priest, which results in 2 dead warriors and 2 damage for Knutz. He then draws a card off of the Oakham adversary, and in his second main, he plays a Diabolic Intent for 2 mana and sacrificing a warrior token to tutor up a card into his hand. At the end of Matt's turn, Dario cracks his Polluted Delta, losing 1 life and searching for a Watery Grave, which enters the battlefield tapped. Dario then begins his turn with untapping, drawing a card and playing a Forbidden Orchard as his land for the turn. He then plays a Mana Crypt in his first main phase. He immediately taps it for 2 colorless mana and 2 more lands to play Narset, Porter of Wales, remaining 1 colorless mana flooded. He follows up by playing a Windfall. On the huge dissatisfaction from the table, everybody discards their hand and drawing 1 because of Narset. Dario draws 7 because that was the amount of cards in Matt's hand. He then activates Narset's -2 ability and looks at his top 4 cards on the library. He reveals a Mystical Tutor and puts it into his hand. After that, he gives the turn forward to Knutz. After untapping and drawing his card for the turn, Knutz immediately moves to his combat phase to get rid of Narset. Despite the Elvish Mystic and the Priest of Titania, he declares every of his creatures as attacks for Narset. Dario blocks the Llanowar Elves with his Grand Abolisher. Before damage, Knutz activates Chulane's ability and returns the Llanowar Elves back to his hand by paying 3 mana. At the end of combat, Narset is destroyed and Knutz can move to his second main phase. He taps his Gaia's Cradle, which generates him 5 green manas. With 3 of those manas, he pays for a Cloudstone Curio. He then taps the Elvish Mystic for 1 green mana and uses it to play a Llanowar Elves. Chulane triggers on the cast and he draws a card but is unable to put a land onto the battlefield. After the Llanowar Elves enter the battlefield, the Cloudstone Curio triggers and he can put back the Elvish Mystic in his hand. With 1 green mana from his pool, he casts the Elvish Mystic again and Chulane triggers. Knutz draws a card and is finally able to put a land card onto the battlefield. With the trigger from Cloudstone Curio, he can put back into his hand a creature and a land card and has an infinite card draw loop and almost infinite mana because he can tap Gaia's Cradle every time for mana before he returns it to his hand. He draws his entire library and casts Tessa's Oracle, winning the game. What a game! With slow starts from everybody, Luke was the first one who could have almost won the game in the 4th turn. Only thanks to Dario's counterspell the game went on, even though only for 1 more turn cycle in which Knutz achieved his game plan superiorly. So Chulane stands as the winner of this game. This brings us to the end of this clip. We hope you enjoyed this gameplay video and please feel free to like, share and leave a comment. We really appreciate your honest feedback. So, have a good one everybody and until next time.